Good morning, everyone. Today's topic is Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga, and it's the first in a series of 5 presentations on his Jnana Yoga. And we're going to open today's session with a guided meditation that Vivekananda himself gave in his Raja Yoga classes. And this is to give you a 4 to 5 minute experiential approach to what he is talking about in his Jnana Yoga. So let us sit with eyes closed, feet flat on the floor, hands held loosely in our lap, right palm upturned as his palms are showing on the screen. And let's begin by taking in 3 deep breaths, breathing in deeply and exhaling completely. Picture the mind as a calm lake stretched before you. Let the mind drift. See how thoughts come and go as bubbles, rising and breaking on the surface, becoming ripples that are ever widening circles. Make no effort to control your thoughts, but watch them. Follow them in imagination as they rise, break, and float away. I am not the mind. I see that I am thinking. I am watching my mind act. Hold fast to the idea. I am the witness, watching my mind drift. The mind is not I. Watch the mind as a thing entirely apart from yourself. Identify yourself with God, never with the mind or matter. Be the witness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. So this meditation gives us a little insight into what it is we are about to enter into. This is an introduction to Jnana Yoga. All religions are divided into 2 parts, theory and practice. Yoga is the practical side of religion. Jnana means knowledge. Ya means to know. Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga is a yoga by means of knowledge. That is Vivekananda explaining it in his own words. The object of Jnana Yoga is freedom. He says, freedom from our imperfections, freedom from the misery of life. Why are we miserable? We are miserable because we are bound. What is the bondage? The bondage is of nature. Who is it that binds us? We ourselves. In fact, the whole cosmos is bound by the law of causation. In the external world, there is nothing, no fact of our existence that is uncaused. And every cause must have an effect. This bondage is a fact of life. Though I may want to die, I may not want to die, I must. I may want to become rich and famous, but I cannot. When we have such desires as these, but no means to gratify them, we feel misery. And what is the cause of desire? I myself. Therefore, I alone am the cause of all of my miseries. That's our human condition. Jnana is the method of undoing our karma. The cause of our bondage is ignorance. Our true nature, however, is pure and perfect. The Atman covered over by a false sense of who I am. This little I, my apparent self. I identify myself with so many coverings, this body, this mind, this ego that asserts, I am so and so, I own such and such. And the height of ego consciousness, when we identify ourselves not only with our own body and mind, but with our hair, our clothes, our car, our home, our job, our political party, our shadow self. Swami Pravrajika explained the superimposition of the ego idea upon existence is our first and most important act as a human being. The moment we have made the central act of superimposition, the moment we have said, I am I, we have set up a kind of chain reaction which makes further superimposition inevitable. The claim to individuality for ourselves implies individuality everywhere. This ego idea and world appearance depend upon each other. To know our true self, Jnana Yoga uses methods of sheer intellectual reasoning. Now, Advaita Vedanta we find in the scriptures, but the method to attain the self is found in Jnana Yoga. He says, Vivekananda says, this method can only be followed by the boldest. If reason tells us that this body is an illusion, are you ready to give it up? Reason tells you that heat and cold are mere illusions of our senses. Are you ready to brave these things? If reason tells you that nothing that the senses convey to your mind is true, are you ready to deny your sense perception? If you dare, you are a rationalist. Heat and cold are illusions caused by our joining ourselves with the body. Our true self is in truth separate from the body, mind, and senses. There are those who have realized this and thus inspire us to attain the same. In Kolkata, Swami Trigunatita developed fistula, which requires surgery. The doctor told him that it would be painful and would use chloroform to put him to sleep, but Trigunatita told the doctor he would endure the pain. Swami Trigunatitananda was a direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. The surgeon was amazed during the half hour of surgery, even though he cut 6 inches into Swami Trigunatita, he saw no change on his face. The Swami was as calm as if he were in deep meditation. This is what is meant by following reason and Jnana Yoga. However, it's important to add a cautionary word of advice. Do not attempt such radical feats of detachment yet, if you have not practiced the spiritual prowess to support them. So, such mental control requires years of practice under the guidance of a qualified teacher. Swami Vivekananda goes further. First, he says, man cannot get at truth by external methods. Second, this entire universe is built on design. By knowing one lump of clay, we can know the whole mass of clay. So also, the individual is like the lump of clay, a part of the whole design. Vivekananda again explains, if we know the human soul, which is one atom, its beginning and general history, we know the whole of nature, birth, growth, development, decay, death. This is the sequence in all nature and is the same in the plant and the man. The difference is only in time. Third, Vivekananda tells us in his introduction to Jnana Yoga, the only way to correctly analyze the universe is by the analysis of our own minds. And this simple meditation that we did at the beginning is a wonderful first step into analyzing what is going on in our mind. And it is actually a pratyahara meditation, usually done at the beginning of a normal meditation, to stabilize and detach ourselves from the mind, to watch the mind, so that we can begin to gather the mind and bring it into the heart. Third, Vivekananda tells us a proper psychology is essential to understanding of religion. To reach truth by reason alone is impossible, because imperfect reason cannot study its own fundamental basis, which makes perfect sense. Therefore, the only way to study the mind is to get at facts, and then intellect will arrange them and deduce the principles. The intellect has to build the house, but it cannot do so without bricks, and it cannot make bricks. Now we turn to Sankhya Yoga, of which the yoga psychology was the later outgrowth and forms the building blocks of Jnana Yoga. we need to study the psychology of the mind. The organs of perception aren't external sense instruments. For example, the occipital lobe processes how we perceive sight, and the visual cortex determines how we identify objects of the brain. The organ of sight, in other words, the organ of sight is not the eye. It's not this. It's deep within us. The nature of the mind is like a lake. When struck by a stone, it sends out vibrations, which are called vrittis, thought waves of the mind. And you experience this in the opening guided meditation. Vivekananda tells us, the mind is like a lake. It is constantly being set in vibrations of thoughts, emotions, memories, sense perceptions, which leave an impression on the mind, and the idea of the ego or personal self, the I, is the result of these impressions, the little I. This I, therefore, is only the very rapid transmission of force and is in itself no reality. This is a little daunting, but when we begin to go into Jnana Yoga, this is also very strength-giving because we are relying more and more on witnessing the mind, and that leads us further. This higher mind, which witnesses the mind, points to the Atman. We can watch the mind. Therefore, that which can be observed is matter. This is science. Where is our intelligence? Again, Vivekananda. It is behind matter. It is the jiva, the real self, he says, with a capital S, working through the instrument of matter. So the real self is behind this mind of ours. We just need to tap into it. What causes perceptions? When I see an external object, I cannot know that object until the mind reacts. Every observed object in the universe is known by the I plus the mind, and therefore colored by our individual tendencies. Vivekananda says, the real wall or the real universe is outside the mind and is unknown and unknowable. Call this universe X. And our statement is that the seen universe is X plus the mind. So all of this is X to me plus the mind. How then can and do we then know the mind? Like a wall, any external object is essentially unknown to us. Vivekananda postulates, if we call ourselves Y, then Y plus the mind is our inner self. Therefore, for both external and internal objects, what Vivekananda calls X, this universal, this universe, and Y, ourself, the mind stands in between them and reacts on both. Our external and internal world, this universe and our mind, can only be known through the medium of the mind and are therefore known imperfectly, not as the actual things in themselves. Since external objects are therefore unknown to us, qualities we give them are derived solely from our own mind. Therefore, each of us sees the world in our own way. Vivekananda reminds us, Kant was the first to arrive at this analysis of mind, but it was long ago stated in the Vedas. Swami Satprakashananda, in his wonderful text, Methods of Knowledge, which we carry here, summarizes the nature of perception. He states, in the Vedantic view, none of the organs, nor the mind, nor their conjunction can bring about cognition, there being no light of consciousness in any of these. Radiance of consciousness underlies all perceptions, external as well as internal. It belongs neither to the body, nor to the organs, nor even to the mind. In other words, it is behind the mind. Without that self within, we cannot think, we cannot feel, etc. But until we tap into that self behind the mind, we do not see correctly, we do not hear correctly. Satprakashananda goes on. As pointed out by the sage Patanjali, even the mind is not self-luminous because it is observable. And you, as yogis and scientists, you discovered that in the guided meditation. Because science tells us that which we can observe is matter. Satprakashananda continues. Consciousness is intrinsic in the knowing self, the subject per se, which illumines the mind and the senses and manifests the objects perceived. Other than the knowing self, the rest, the sense organs and the mind, are blind, being devoid of the power of vision or awareness. Try howsoever they may, any number of blind persons gathering together can have no sight, not even a single glimpse of light. So the mind perceives through time, space, and causation. Vivekananda tells us time is a condition for the transmission of thought and space for the vibration of grosser matter. Time is the condition for the transmission of thought and space for the vibration of grosser matter. Causation is the sequence in which vibrations come. Mind can only cognize through these. Anything, therefore, beyond mind must be beyond time, space, and causation. This is heavy going, but this ultimate reality, God the Absolute, is the only permanent reality, Jnana Yoga tells us. It's beyond time, space, and causation. And when we know that, we cognize clearly, just as Sri Ramakrishna and his direct disciples did. They saw through whatever it was they saw externally. They saw the inside, the true nature of all that they perceived. Vivekananda explains, it's light. Its light percolates through every form of mind. Note, our true self is by nature free, but when mixed with mind and body, it is not. What is human will? It's the first limitation of our real self. Will is the compound of the higher self plus the mind. How does our true self become mixed up with the mind, thought, and will? Again, we go back to Vivekananda. It never has become mixed. You are the real you, the self. You never were will. You never have changed. You as a person never existed. It is illusion. Well, that's a pretty tall statement. What then is the purpose of life? To give us experience, to manifest divinity already within us. This is where we begin the steps to realization in Jnana Yoga. Shama and Dhamma are the first. keeping the organs of perception in their own centers. As we see when we are looking into the eyes of an illumined soul, they are not externalized. They are looking within. The wonderful expression of truth is beheld in the eyes of an illumined soul, keeping the organs of perception in their own centers. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the hands are instruments of perception, and the organs of perception are in the brain. Unless the mind attaches itself to external instruments and organs of perception in the brain, no perception takes place. The mind, our mind, acts through these two agencies, one external and one internal. In other words, when I see you, the mind goes out and becomes externalized and encompasses your form. Both my internal organ and external instrument of sight are active. But if I close my eyes, the mind does not go out, but still remains internally active. I am able to picture you in my mind's eye. So the organ, the nerve center in the brain, is still active. In any act of perception, there are three requisites: the external instrument, plus the internal organ of the brain, and third, the mind. To control the mind, we must learn to control these internal organs. We go to Vivekananda. To restrain the mind, he says, from wandering outward or inward, and keep the organs in their respective centers, is what is meant by the words Shama and Dhamma. Shama consists in not allowing the mind to externalize, and Dhamma in checking the external instruments. And this is what we see when we are looking into the eyes of an illumined soul. For example, Sri Krishna refers to this power of the mind in the Gita, 2nd chapter, verse 58, when he tells us the tortoise can draw in its legs, the seer can draw in his senses. I call him illumined. Advanced aspirants are able to withdraw all their senses from contact with exterior sense objects. For example, Rani Rashmani and Mathur Babu tested Sri Ramakrishna during his first 4 years of sadhana. They thought he developed a mental disorder due to his unbroken celibacy. So they engaged Lakshmi Bai and other beautiful prostitutes to tempt him. First at Dakshineshwar, then at a house in Michua Bazaar in Calcutta. Swami Sardananda wrote, "The master told us that when he saw those women, what did he see? Only the Divine Mother. Saying, 'Mother, Mother,' he lost outer consciousness. As a tortoise draws its limbs inside its shell," Sardananda wrote, "so the master's sex organ shrank inside his body. Witnessing this amazing phenomenon and charmed by his childlike nature, those young women felt maternal affection in their hearts. And with tearful eyes, they begged Sri Ramakrishna's forgiveness. They bowed down to him again and again and left." Now we come to Aparati. Again, we see a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna and look closely at his eyes. Uparati means withdrawing the mind from sense objects. What does this mean? What we have seen, heard, tasted, touched, what we shall see, hear, taste, and touch. Shankara explains the mind is attached to the senses. It is like water in a tank. It goes out through outlets and engulfs a field. So all this mind of ours takes the shape of the object and is transformed by what it focuses on. Therefore, we must gather the forces of the mind and mentally shut off all doors of senses and let no desire enter. Easier said than done. How do we do this? When Sri Ramakrishna sat down to meditate, he heard the clattering sounds of his joints. He felt as if someone had been locking him up from inside. He lost all power to move his body or change his posture. He was forced to sit in the same position until his joints began clattering again and were unlocked. Likewise, Swami Pravrajika, disciple of Swami Brahmananda, explained, a holy man once taught me to imagine locking the doors of the senses with a key. So this is something that we can do when we sit for meditation. To visually imagine that, and that helps to withdraw our mind. Once the mind is silenced, then it's easier to silence the tongue. Titiksha is forbearance. Mahatma Gandhi is a living example of non-resistance. Resist not evil. What does it mean? If we're insulted and don't retaliate, but inwardly seethe with anger and indignation, that's not forbearance. Instead, if there is no reaction in the mind, then we've attained a state of forbearance. For example, Swami Saradananda was with a devotee in a boat going upstream. Again, he's another direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. And the Swami was smoking a hookah. It so happened that a storm arose and the boatmen moved from one side of the boat to the other to steady it. But the devotee became frantic. However, Swami remained undisturbed, smoking his hookah. The devotee got so irritated at the Swami's calmness that he grabbed the hookah and threw it into the Ganges. And only the stem remained in the Swami's hand. He shouted, "How can you smoke at this time?" The storm eventually subsided and the boat reached the shore. And a Swami came to greet Swami Saradananda, and lo, he saw the hookah pipe stem in the Swami's hand. "What happened?" he asked. Swami Saradananda replied, "Ask your friend." Swami Vivekananda said about Swami Saradananda, "Your blood is just like that of a fish. It doesn't boil." Shraddha. A sage once told Swami Vivekananda, "Not 1 in 20 million people believe in God." Why? Vivekananda asked. The sage replied, "Suppose a thief hears that there is a mound of gold in the next room. What will he do?" Vivekananda said he won't sleep. His brain will be consumed by thoughts of how to get that gold. The sage said, "Do you believe that anyone could believe in God and not go mad to get him? If someone sincerely believes that there is an infinite mine of bliss and that it can be reached, wouldn't that person become mad in an effort to reach it?" Shraddha is conviction in God and the hunger to reach him. Samadhana is self-surrender. Vivekananda interprets this as constant practice. He says the mind can be conquered only by slow and steady practice. Well, we can relate to that. because we know our progress is slow and hopefully it's steady. Girish Ghosh asked Sri Ramakrishna, what spiritual practices should I do? And we all know about Girish. He was a renegade. He was an alcoholic. He was filled with lust to the brim, and he led a completely undisciplined life. Sri Ramakrishna said, keep to both this, meaning God, and that, meaning the world. Just try to think of him every morning and evening. Simple enough. But Girish said, how can I think of him when I can't even remember to eat or sleep? My schedule is so busy. So he was an actor. He was in charge of the theater. He was a writer of poetry, songs, and also plays. Girish knew that any obligation, any rule or vow would suffocate him until he broke it. Sri Ramakrishna read Girish's mind. He said, very well, if you cannot do that, remember him once before taking food and once before going to bed. But Girish protested again. How can I obey when my habits are so irregular? Sri Ramakrishna looked and smiled. You will say I cannot even do that. Very well, then give me your power of attorney. Girish was delighted, thinking that he would not have to do anything. But little did he know that the power of attorney tied him to God with the golden chain of self-surrender, one step away from attaining burning desire for liberation. Henceforth, there was nothing he could do without first surrendering to the will of God. In this way, his life was transformed by ingesting the powerful medicine that worked its cure from inside out. After the master passed away, Girish lost his wife and son, but had to accept all these events as part of the path of self-surrender. He said, now I understand a little of the mystery and the power of attorney. There is a limit to the time one must spend practicing meditation, japa, and austerities. But the work of a person who is given the power of attorney is unending. My guru, Swami Pravrajika, met Girish Ghosh before he came to the West. And he went to his house. There was a holy atmosphere. And Girish was pacing. He had 3 stenographers, different plays, different songs, different poetry. And he would ring a bell and he would pace and dictate to one or the other. He would stop, he would meditate, he'd ring the bell again, pace. The atmosphere was palpable. Mumukshutva, the desire for liberation. Vivekananda challenges us. Study your own lives and find how little of happiness there is in them, and how little in truth you have gained in the course of this wild goose chase of the world. That's a bold challenge. He goes on, he reminds us that we're like bullocks that go round and round the oil mill to grind the oil seed. We are blindfolded and yoked with a stick distended from the yoke on which is fastened a straw. So we stretch our necks forward to get at the straw, which we can never reach. But that act forces us round and round the oil mill, grinding out oil from its seed from one life to the next. Vivekananda tells us. And so we are always chasing a wisp of straw, a mere chimera, and are going through an innumerable round of lives without obtaining what we seek: love and to be loved and happiness. Such is the power of nature over us, all of us. This is how Vivekananda taught those seeking jnana in the late 19th century, and how his words continue to teach us in the 21st century. To experience eternal bliss, the Ananda of Satchit Ananda, we must go beyond happiness and sadness, pleasure and pain, all the pairs of opposites. Otherwise, we become slaves to a happiness that doesn't last, pleasures that grow old. Nitya Viveka is discrimination between the real and the unreal. We have arrived at truth that everything in this world is impermanent. This whole universe is in a state of flux. Swami Vivekananda tells us, but there is one who never changes, and that is God. And the nearer we get to him, the less will be the change for us. The less will nature be able to work on us. We might ask, but how then can we access that abiding state? He again tells us, all knowledge is within us. All perfection is there already in the soul. But this perfection has been covered up by nature. Layer after layer of nature is covering this purity of the soul. We simply take the veil off, and the soul manifests itself in its pristine purity, its natural, innate freedom. So begins our inquiry into Jnana Yoga. Vivekananda cautions, truth does not dawn by mere intellectual study. It's very tempting to think that we've read all of the complete works, that we are jnanis, perfect karma yogis, bhaktas, raja yogis. No, we have to practice. Vivekananda tells us it is the heart which takes one to the highest plane, which intellect can never reach. It goes beyond intellect and reaches to what is called inspiration. Now, in my life, I have never met a dry jnani, a true jnani, one who has realized the absolute. They are filled with love, because that which is sat is also chit, and that is what is chit is also ananda, love, abiding love. To master self-inquiry, we must continue to purify the heart with all prerequisites that lead us to self-inquiry. Shama, Dhamma, Viparati, Titiksha, Shraddha, Samadhana, and Mumukshutva. What is that purity of heart? Vivekananda reminds us when Moses was told, take off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Vivekananda tells us we must always approach the study of religion with that reverent attitude. He who comes with a pure heart and a reverent attitude, his heart will be opened. The doors will open for him, and he will see the truth. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.